Ladies and gentlemen, I want to. Do we have somebody on the prayer line? Did we have somebody join us? No, I guess not. Okay, let me do this. Let me go back to Larry Clayman's. What I want to do is I want to just go back to his comments and see if we can use this as a discussion time and a prayer time. Actually, a time for prayer, because I believe we need to pray specifically. And we're in the prayer room, and Mr. Davis is here, and I'm here, and the hitchhiker's here. But I think what I want us to do is to go. I'm going to go to this thing that's on my Facebook. By the way, if you'd like to go to my Facebook is Wiley Drake, and you can go to that Facebook and pull down whatever you'd like. But Wiley Drake is where Larry Clayman is on, and I'm going to play this again, and then we're going to discuss it. But it's going to be more than a discussion. It's going to be the discussion, or if you will, the sort of topic of our prayer time together. So let me play this one more time, and anybody is welcome if they come on to talk about it. But in the meantime, we're going to discuss it because I think it's important.
Good day. My name is Larry Clayman. You know me as the Chairman and General Counsel of Judicial Watch, a public interest group I founded in 1994. I later ran for the U.S. Senate in 2004 and came out and founded freedomwatchusa.org. That's our website. I want to give you a message today which is very important as we head into the presidential elections of this Tuesday. It doesn't matter who you vote for. This country must be restored by the American people themselves. We cannot rely on any politician to do our job, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. But let me point out something today. We've all seen with these current Hillary Clinton private email server scandals, where the courts have not enforced the rule of law, where WikiLeaks had to obtain documents illegally and release them for people to understand the full extent how the rule of law is broken down in this country. Why the American people need to restore the republic in their own right. The reality is that our judges today primarily have been chosen by either Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. If it had been a Republican administration, you would have seen the same thing. But we need to rise up in a peaceful, non-violent way, like Lech Walesa did in Poland when he helped defeat communism in conjunction with Pope John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher, like Mahatma Gandhi did in India and South Africa in bringing freedom to his people, like Martin Luther King did in the 60s with creating some freedom for African Americans and for others. We, the American people, need to remember that the be-all and end-all is not this Tuesday, but we need to educate ourselves and demand change in this country. And I'm calling for a Third Continental Conference, a Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia, shortly after the inauguration of the next president, to elect a government in waiting, in fact, an alternative government, to guide whatever government's in power in the interests of the American people. Stay tuned for that. Check out our website at www.freedomwatchusa.org. God bless you, and may God save America.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Larry Clayman, and I've had working relationships with him for years. He is now the attorney for my dear friend, Cliven Bundy and Carol Bundy over in the state of Nevada. He's been very instrumental in a lot of things. He had what was called Judicial Watch, and now he has this organization. And I want you to check out what God is doing through him. I believe it's important. As I understood Larry, the synopsis of what he said was, whoever's elected, he didn't say which one, but whoever's elected, it's not a win all, do all, but that we're in such tragic shape in this country, we, the people, need to establish, shortly after the inauguration is on the 20th, and by the way, I will be at that inauguration. Lord willing, on the 20th. And I have a table there, and if you'd like to have a seat at that table, you're welcome to come and be a part of it. Go to the prayer conference call number or so forth. But anyway, I don't want us to get tied up on that. I want us to talk about, because I have a gentleman here that is not only a minister of the gospel, he ministered this morning on this day in our services as a shamash, helping us with the Lord's Supper and so forth. He also helps on this program. He is a producer of this program. He is my brother in Christ, and I want you to pray for him and pray for his dear wife. And I talked with her just a little while ago. I'm not going into that detail because it's personal, but the bottom line is that we want you to pray with us and pray about this thing. I'll have to admit I need some legal assistance here, Mr. Attorney. Larry Clayman said he felt like we ought to start a third Continental Congress. I don't know about that. I don't know much about it. I'm not that historically astute. So he says shortly after the inauguration of the president, i.e. January the 20th, that shortly thereafter we should meet in Philadelphia. And as a group of people, we the people, and establish a third Continental Congress. Tell us about number 1 and number 2, and then what your feelings are in reference to number 3.
You have to remember that the United States, what became the United States, were first known as the colonies. And they were the colonies that were set up through Britain. And so we had a king, and the king was not only the king of the British Empire, but he was also the king of the colonies. And the problem is there began to have a little bit of a falling out between taxes that the king wanted to impose upon the colonies. This is the infamous Boston Tea Party, where they threw the tea off of the ships because they didn't want to pay the taxes for it. And they were complaining about this tax act that the British sovereign, the king, had put on it. And it was also known as the Stamp Act, because you had to buy a stamp to stick on a product to show that the taxes had been paid on that product. And this led to more of a falling out, and you finally had what was known as the coercive acts. In other words, they didn't like the fact that the colonies were complaining about how badly treated that they were, and so the British Parliament, passed what was known as the coercive acts. Well, this really got people upset, and so in 1774, now this is before the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence was 1776. So the colonies, of the 13 colonies we had, 12 of them decided to have a meeting to figure out what we were going to do. And you think, okay, why only 12 out of the 13? Well, the answer is that Georgia was having a horrendous problem with Indians, and they were hoping that the British government would help them with this Native American Indian uprising, and that was causing all sorts of problems. So as a result, we wind up having this first Continental Congress, and this was all of the colonies, except for Georgia, getting together and saying, what are we going to do with this problem? Now, all of the future presidents and luminaries and founding fathers were there. John Adams was there, George Washington was there, John Jay was there. The be-all and end-all of the founding fathers were there. The thing that the first Continental Congress did is, believe it or not, it just sent a series of letters to the Crown saying, hey, we're really unhappy about this. We really wish you would stop doing this, and if you don't stop doing it, we're going to stop importing goods from the British Isle. So in other words, the first Continental Congress, in essence, set up a boycott of British goods to get the British government to stop pushing them so hard on taxes and some other things. Well, it didn't go very well. The Brits pretty well ignored the colonists, and so it didn't go very well at all. Well, then comes the Second Continental Congress. Now, the Second Continental Congress got a little more interesting, and this was done in 1775, May 10th, 1775. the American Revolution has kind of sort of already begun. We've already started having armed conflicts between the colonists in the United America and the Brits.
Now, let me stop you there just for a minute because, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me. I do know a little bit of history, and not nearly what Dr. Davis does, but I do remember using quite often that one of the phrases that we use, you used a phrase a while ago about our colonies being ruled by a king, and that therein is what happened. And one of the things that I mentioned, and I'll let you get back to that in a moment, but the bottom line is that we had a slogan, we had a saying during the Revolutionary War: "No king but King Jesus," and so that was the move and that was the attitude. But tell us now, we understand, I think most of us, what the First Continental Congress did, and now the Second Continental Congress. Tell us more about what they did.
Well, now they have a little more of a problem because you had the British Army in Boston has met with armed resistance. You have the uprisings in Lexington and Concord, which happened in April of 1775. Welcome to the start of the Second Amendment issue, where you have the colonists saying, we got guns, we're unhappy, we want to do something about it. And so as a result of the colonists, the citizens, militia, whatever term you want to use, having firearms, they were able to drive the Brits out of Boston and lay siege to the town, and lo and behold, the Revolutionary War has started. So now we have a problem. We're supposed to be loyal to Britain, we're certainly supposed to be loyal to the king. Certainly we have all sorts of problems here because if God appointed the king, and if the king is the emissary of God on earth for taking care of civil matters, we just have a problem with this. So the Second Continental Congress gets organized, and they're like, okay, what are we going to do now? Well, there was two huge fights going on with the Second Continental Congress. The first one is, are we going to try to reconcile with the British Empire, with the king and Parliament, and go back to being good, loyal citizens of Britain, and be loyal colonists of Britain, or are we going to do something else? And there was correspondence that went back and forth between the king, Parliament, and the colonists in the United States.
And many of us, i.e. Christians, were saying, we don't want to go back to a king. We want no king but King Jesus. Go ahead.
That's true. So as a result of this, now bear in mind that it took a heck of a long time to get a letter from the Americans over to Britain. You had to put it on.
They didn't know how to text?
No. And the internet was very intermittent, and we ain't going to talk about radios. You had to put it on a boat and ship it over there. So it took a while to get back and forth. And so there was an effort to avoid foil-scale war. The Second Continental Congress coupled a declaration with the Olive Branch Petition, and there was a personal appeal to King George saying, hey, can't we get this problem resolved? It didn't go anywhere. Problem with these mortal kings is they tend to be kind of egotistical SOBs, much like certain people sitting in Washington now who think they're a king, and we won't talk about that right this moment. So what ultimately happened is the Continental Congress oversaw the Declaration of Independence. Now, welcome to July 4, 1776, where those that were talking about reconciliation with Britain and the king said, now we've had enough of this stuff, let's go out and do our own thing. So the Continental Congress, second edition, went after the Declaration of Independence. Well, great. Now we've got the Brits, they were telling them goodbye. How the heck do we set up a country? We got 13 colonies. We don't have any national authority. We got a bunch of dudes drinking in the pubs, trying to figure out how we're going to put this mess together. And lo and behold, they finally said, you know what? We're going to have some sort of a document, some sort of an agreement that puts us all together. Well, if you remember the Mayflower Compact, sometimes referred to as the birth certificate of the United States of America. So that certainly set forth some goals and some rights and some issues. And so using that and the Declaration of Independence as a starting point, they tried to put together some sort of written agreement that all of the colonies could agree to that in essence would create a country by agreement. Now, what's interesting about that is you often hear that, well, there is no really United States government, it's just a big corporation, and that's how things happen. No, that's a misreading of what happened. Was the United States created by a bunch of guys agreeing to create the country? Yes. That doesn't mean it was a corporation. Certainly there was corporate issues involved in terms of majority rule and articles and things like that. As a matter of fact, the first national plan that was put together was called the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation was trying to figure out, one, how do we have a single entity, a single government that has assistance or some sort of supervision over the 13 colonies, but the 13 colonies still remain independent in that. Well, they tried to put that together, and part of the problem was money. How do you fight a war? How do you set up a government if you have no money? So one of the issues that the Continental Congress was trying to deal with under the Articles of Confederation was taxes. We need the money. And so they defined the national powers. It was drafted and adopted by Congress in 1777. So 1 year after the Declaration of Independence. Didn't get ratified until 1781 because the individual colonies weren't real happy about giving up authority that the Articles of Confederation were going to give up. So there was a knockdown, drag out, all sorts of bad times. Plus we still had this stupid little war going on, the Revolutionary War, and so things were not going well. Ultimately, they said, okay, this is not going to work. We wound up winning the Revolutionary War in 1783. And what you had was the Treaty of Paris. And that's in which the colonists and Britain agreed to lay down their arms. We're not going to fight anymore. And things got put back together again. So now we had to figure out what the heck we were going to do. British troops finally evacuated this city of New York City. And that was in 1783. So the Revolutionary War was over, and the Congress was there to try to figure out what to do. Unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation just didn't work. Bad things happened. It was unpleasant. So they got back together again, and they wrote the Constitution. And what the Constitution was, and this is important, the Constitution was the second attempt to put together a national government. So as a result, we tried the first time, didn't work, and instead of the colonies fighting with each other, and instead of people pulling out guns and pointing them at each other, they got together and said, okay, this is not working, let's get together and let's create something better. And hence we wound up with the Constitution. And that was passed by everybody, and that became the governing document for the United States of America.
Now, at that point, of course, we've had the first and second Continental Congress, and now they've worked down to what we all know now as the Constitution, and it appears that there was one discussion when Mr. Ben Franklin, I believe it was, came out of the meeting, and someone, maybe a reporter, somebody that was a forerunner to Wiley Drake's show or something, said to Mr. Franklin, in reference to this Constitution, what have you given us? And Mr. Franklin said, ma'am or sir, we have given you a republic if you can keep it. Now, our concern is maybe we haven't kept it, but go ahead.
This is why this idea of a third Continental Congress is interesting. And I'll tell you what Larry is trying to bypass by calling it a third Continental Congress. There are two ways to amend the Constitution. The first is if you get enough senators and enough congressmen to vote, and it's 2/3 majority, and you get the president to sign off on it, then you can amend the Constitution.
Now, if I understand you, though, it takes 2/3 vote, and anybody that's anybody knows you couldn't get Congress and senators and members of the House and so forth, you couldn't get 2/3 to agree that today's Sunday.
Probably not.
Go ahead.
They'd probably ask you in what part of the world and the international date line, and there'd be a whole bunch of arguments. Another way to do it is what's known as a states convention otherwise known as the Convention of States. What that is if you get 2/3 of the states to meet, then the states can pass amendments and can fix things that they don't like. Well, needless to say, the federal government hates that idea really bad.
Yeah.
They don't want that at all because it's very possible for a convention of states to come in and completely change Congress and the presidency and the Supreme Court by changing the Constitution.
And the chances of that are probably, in my opinion, slim and none.
And let me tell you what's so bad about this. If you go to a gun show or whatever, you can get a little teeny weeny pocket book. They ain't this big that has the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in it, and you can stick it in your shirt pocket and carry around. It ain't much bigger than a cell phone nowadays, and yet the entire Constitution is in it.
Yep.
However, you go to a law library and look at what is known as the annotations to the Constitution. In other words, changes in the Constitution, case law that had something to do with the Constitution, some other issues relating to the Constitution, and you are talking book after book after book.
A whole room full of books.
So what started out as a very small, simple idea got really ugly really quick. And so in the last 200 years, what has happened is the old saying is power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what we have is a federal government that has become completely corrupted.
And that's exactly what Larry was talking about, because he said the rule of law, and that's what we would hope would happen. The rule of law has been ignored. The rule of law has been overrun. The government has overrun everything. And so then he suggests that as soon as the new government is voted in, i.e. the new presidential inauguration and vice president, that very quickly thereafter, we, the people, meet and establish and arrange a third Continental Congress.
Well, let's talk about what's interesting about that. And I certainly would never make any allegations against Larry Klayman that he is in any way, shape, or form making any sort of an illegal or veiled threat. He's not doing that. However, let's look at the history. The problem we have with now is that the politicians kind of sort of treat the Constitution like suggestions or guidelines, when in reality, no, it's the law.
Yeah.
And you can't go around it, beside it, whatever. And yet not a day goes by that they don't do that.
Yeah.
That they figure out their huge argument of how do we get around this. The fact that a politician would even say, how do we get around the Constitution, scares the heck out of me.
Yeah, I agree.
And yet you hear that all the time. Well, stop and think of what happened. The first Continental Congress, they sent a letter, they tried to negotiate, they tried to work things out, didn't work. The second Continental Congress comes in, and what do we wind up with? A war. We wind up with citizens picking up arms and kicking the Brits out of the Boston area, Lexington, Concord, a huge revolutionary fight coming down. Took many years to finally get the Brits beaten and get them out of here, but it happened. So we literally took up arms against the king. Stop and think about that. That's kind of scary. If you want to look at the history that a king is appointed by God to see over a country, and that's why kings were considered to have special authority over things, and now you're taking up guns against the king, yeah, an argument could be made that you're taking up guns against God. Yeah. Oh, that's kind of an interesting problem. So now we have the third, this idea of a third Continental Congress. Is he saying that what we ought to do is petition the new leader, be it Hillary Rotten Clinton, the thief and crook, or Donald Trump, who's slightly egotistical, we'll have to deal with him. But is we going to say, look, we have some problems, we need these things dealt with, or we're going to do like the second Continental Congress did and pick up arms again? I don't know. I don't know if that's what Larry Klayman was hinting at, but do I see a movement afoot where we, the people, sit down and say, look, we're tired of this, we don't like this, we want it fixed, and have in our back pocket the Second Amendment that says that we can take up arms against a tyrannical government, and a tyrannical government is one that is oppressive, that overlooks the will of the people, who does not follow the Constitution, and all of those sort of things. Yeah, I could argue that.
Well, let me interrupt you there for a minute, because you mentioned back you didn't want to try to put words in Larry's mouth, and neither do I. He's a great man of God, and I believe he would be willing to share his own opinion if he were here. Unfortunately, we don't have him, and we'll get him, and I'll give you that as an assignment. We need to have Larry Kingman come on. You need to set it up as producer of the Wiley Drake Show, so that we can bring Larry on and say, okay, if you think, and he did not mince any words about whether we should or should not. He said not just should, not just coulda, shoulda, woulda, but shortly thereafter the inauguration, we ought to establish a Third Continental Congress. Now, did he mean arms or no arms? Well, I think he made it very clear that we're not going to come at this thing with, okay, we're going to take up arms and take over, but that we indeed are willing, if necessary, I believe he would say that, but that he believes there's a better way, and that is to bring about a peaceful change in this government with a Third Continental Congress. Now, we obviously will have to get Larry to speak to that, and I give you that assignment.
Well,
now,
here's what the problem is. We don't really have a good definition for the word tyrannical. We're certainly, by looking at the Federalist Papers, and those were the writings of those that put together the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they explained what they meant when they wrote it. So if you want kind of go right to the heart of the beginning, you read the Federalist Papers, and it tells you about things. It talks a little bit about tyrannical government, but you don't get a good definition of that. Now, if you look at tyrannical in just a normal dictionary, you get that it's unjust, cruel, harsh, severe, arbitrary, or oppressive and despotic. Well, certainly I could argue arbitrary on a regular basis. What we continue to see is how the government wants to divide we the people up into, you may call it the have and have-nots, you may call it income inequality, you may want to call it some other things, but it's certainly problems where we have to deal with that. And so as a result of that, there have been times when it was used against certain people. For example, Yasser Arafat was referred to as being tyrannical, and we know that Saddam Hussein out of Iraq was referred to as being tyrannical. And so there are times when it's been used. But do we have a good definition now? No. So if I was to participate in the Third Continental Congress, the first motion I would make is, Larry, we really need to have a working definition of tyrannical. So we have a test that we can give our current government to see if, in fact, our current government is tyrannical, so that we now can trigger the Second Amendment, if necessary, to get this fixed. Truly scary thought? Absolutely. But legally, is that how you do it? Yes, words have meaning. And this is the way it's done.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I have my brother, Brother Davis, who's an attorney, who is what I call my wordsmith. And when I want to put something out, I tell him what I think and what I feel and what I believe based on the authority of God's holy word. And then I say, now put that in words, wordsmith that up. And I use the term there just like they used the old blacksmith. You know, old blacksmith would go in the shop and take a piece of iron, just an old flat piece of iron, and heat it up till it was nice and red hot, blue hot, and soft, and then form it into a shape of a horseshoe or whatever he would form it into. So he was a blacksmith. And I believe wordsmith, people that know how to put words together, people that are good communicators can do that. And that's what I've asked many times Mr. Davis to do. And he is already in delving to go into that process again, even though I didn't ask him to. He has agreed to at this point, because he is saying, Mr. Clayman, we do need to wordsmith something up that indeed would bring about some change and to bring about some decency in communications. Now,
well, you have to look at the fact that we have at any one time 9 justices on the United States Supreme Court. So these are certainly 9 learned people. These are people that they're attorneys. They have either practiced law or sat as judges on lower benches. They certainly have had to graduate from law school. They are certainly well-educated individuals. And so you would think, wait a minute, why can't how is it that the 9 justices can't even agree what a single clause of the Constitution says?
Yeah.
Where you have freedom of speech, and yet they'll argue over freedom of speech, what the term freedom of speech means. Look at the freedom of religion, the Establishment Clause, the Practice Clause, whether or not there is more things to it. And what, unfortunately, the Supreme Court is really bad at is reading things into the Constitution that are not there.
Yeah, I agree with that, and so therein lies, again, I believe, the cause for concern that Larry has already phrased. What I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a prayer time, and this data is for us to know how to pray, I'm going to play one more time the short presentation that Larry made. And I don't mean that short, Larry, to be critical of any way, but you have wordsmithed something that I believe we're all concerned about. And if you don't believe that, all you got to do is listen to TV, and you'll hear people on Trump's side and on Clinton's side say, well, whichever one gets elected, we got to do something in America. And I'm of the opinion that we have done everything we can. We started this congressional prayer conference over that very thing. We said the government's out of control. And in the year 2000, we started the Congressional Prayer Conference of Washington, D.C. Not a Congress, not a Continental Congress, but a conference to pray. And we've prayed now since the year 2000. This is 16 years later, and in all honesty, folks, we've made a little headway, but very little in my opinion. So I am of the opinion, I'm going to go on record right now here on, what's today's date? On the 6th day of November in the year of our Lord, 2016, I'm going to go on record as saying, I think we need to do something. And I am of the opinion that doing something has been successful only to a degree in prayer. And I believe we need to do what I say quite often. I think we need to take our prayer and put feet to our prayer. And I believe what Larry Klayman is saying, Wiley has prayed, we have prayed, we've all prayed, and I think the way to put feet to our prayers. Now, Larry, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I believe what Larry is saying is we need to put feet to our prayers by having a third Continental Congress as soon as possible after the inauguration.
But let's talk about what the problem is with that, and one of the huge issues. The federal government has done an unbelievably great job of making the term militia be a curse word.
Yeah, I agree.
And yet when you look at the Constitution, and in particular the Second Amendment and the Federalist Papers, what the militia was supposed to be, the citizens of the state, armed citizens of each state, and the purpose of the militia was to keep the federal government under control. And yet, guess what? Exactly what we were warned would happen by Madison and the rest of the Founding Fathers has happened.
Well, you're absolutely right. And what I want to do in just the next few minutes, I want to go back to Larry's statement, not just to get support for him or even support for the Third Continental Congress, but to let you know how to pray and to let you know more about it. And we'll be coming back later with more. But right now, I'm going to play for you and pray for you Larry Klayman and his message to the nation just before, on this Sunday, before Tuesday of the election. So listen to him again and take notes if you'd like. But if you'd like to go see him say this, simply go to Facebook, put in Wiley Drake, and you will see this there. But right now you can just hear it. And let's see what he says.
Good day. My name is Larry Klayman. You know me as the chairman and general counsel of Judicial Watch, a public interest group I founded in 1994. I later ran for the U.S. Senate in 2004 and came out and founded freedomwatchusa.org. That's our website. I want to give you a message today which is very important as we head into the presidential elections of this Tuesday.
Now listen.
It doesn't matter who you vote for. This country must be restored by the American people themselves. We cannot rely on any politician to do our job, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. But let me point out something today. We've all seen with these current Hillary Clinton private email server scandals, where the courts have not enforced the rule of law, where WikiLeaks had to obtain documents illegally and release them for people to understand the full extent how the rule of law is broken down in this country. Why the American people need to restore the republic in their own right. The reality is that our judges today primarily have been chosen by either Bill Clinton or Barack Obama.
That's
If
right.
it had been a Republican administration, you would have seen the same thing. But we need to rise up in a peaceful, non-violent way,
Peaceful,
like Lech
nonviolent.
Walesa did in Poland when he helped defeat communism in conjunction with Pope John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. Like Mahatma Gandhi did in India and South Africa in bringing freedom to his people. Like Martin Luther King did in the 60s with creating some freedom for African Americans and for others.
Yes.
We, the American people, need to remember that the be-all and end-all is not this Tuesday, but we need to educate ourselves and demand change in this country. And I'm calling for a Third Continental Conference, a Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia, shortly after the inauguration of the next president, to elect a government in waiting, in fact, an alternative government, to guide whatever government's in power in the interests of the American people. Stay tuned for that. Check out our website at www.freedomwatchusa.org. God bless you, and may God save America.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to that website, freedomwatchusa.org, and check it out. And I'm here to say, ladies and gentlemen, based on my opinion, what I think our country needs, I believe Larry is right on target. And I've already sent an email or text to Larry and saying, Larry, what can we do? I know 3 things Jesus would have us do in reference to this. Because you see, Jesus was coming up on the same kind of circumstance we're coming up on. With his disciples, he told them to do 3 things. Number 1, he said pray. Number 2, he said prepare. That's what Larry's talking about. And number 3, he said, arm yourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we must do all 3. I am of the same opinion that Larry and others are. We need to do this thing as peacefully as possible. But ladies and gentlemen, the First Continental Congress ended up in war, and the second one ended up in war. The third one may end up in war. But if that's the case, then it must be God's will, not ours. So, pray for the Third Continental Congress. If you would like to come on the Wiley Drake Show, you just simply call my producer. His name is James Stephen Davis. You saw him just a moment ago. And so I would encourage you, if you'd like to discuss it with him, call him, text him. And if you'd like to be on the show, text him and let him know, indeed, that you would like to be on the show. He's the producer, and I'm going to put the camera back on the producer and have the producer tell you his text number so you can text him and say, hey, I'd like to discuss it. Go ahead.
I'm going to throw a interesting question out for you to look at, and then, of course, by all means, get a hold of me. But one of the things that is, to me, seems really, really simple, and yet we're seeing knockdown dragouts about it, and even experts can't define it. But if you look at how the Second Amendment ends, the last words of the Second Amendment is, shall not be infringed. Now, here's why that's important. The word shall is mandatory under the law. There generally are 2 words in the law, may and shall. May is discretionary. You may do something, you may not do something. It's discretionary. Shall usually, as far as I know, it means it's mandatory. You shall do this. It's an affirmative duty. You got to do it. So where it says shall not be infringed, infringe is interfered with. It didn't say shall not be violated. It said shall not be infringed. Infringe is a broader definition than the word violated, in my humble opinion, because infringe means to interfere. If you look at copyright law and they talk about infringement in copyright law, you'll see that very few words are necessary to constitute an infringement under copyright. So I want you to look at those words and stop and think about what do they mean? What should they mean? And I'd certainly like to discuss that in addition to this idea of a third Continental Congress. And is it time for we, the people, to, quote, lay the law down to the politicians? I agree, yes. How we do it, that's going to be an interesting argument.
Amen.
So what you can do when you're ready to come on the show, you can put in 951-261-0799 and text to me show or Second Amendment or whatever's on your mind and put in your name and your phone number, and then as soon as I can, I will give you a call back when I can turn my phone back on. I'm not in court someplace else for making sure your phone off. I will give you a call and I'll make arrangements to get you on the show. As you know, our show is Monday to Friday at 9 Pacific time and 5 Pacific time, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Mr. Davis, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know my name is Whitey Drake, and I'm the chairman of the Congressional Prayer Conference. Our goal, we said, in 2000 was to pray America back to one nation under God. I believe the First Continental Congress and the second one brought us back to one nation under God. But I believe we have drifted far away from that. We are no longer one nation under God. And I believe Larry is on something that is, in my opinion, profound. Not just because I want to make points with Larry, but because I believe what he's saying is right. I believe it's right not because Larry is so smart, and he is, but I believe it's right because the Bible says the nation whose God is the Lord will be blessed. And ladies and gentlemen, Jesus said we're dealing with a problem. We must pray, we must prepare, and we must, if necessary, arm ourselves. Please get in touch with Mr. Davis. Let him know how you'd like to be involved in this. I have already, as I said, sent a text to Larry and say, hey, count on us. We're here. We're not sure what we can do or how to do it, but we're here, and we want to be helpful, and we do thank you so much. And we would encourage you to be with us tomorrow morning at high noon in Washington, D.C., and that's, of course, 9 o'clock in the morning here, 12 noon in D.C. Join us tomorrow here on the Wiley Drake Show.
For those states who didn't comply with the spring forward, fall back, I have no idea when it is. You'll have to figure it out.
All right. Anyway, we have changed our clocks. We did change the time. Did not take a Continental Congress to do it, but we did do it. And I set my clocks, and I think I've got everything adjusted. But I want you to say, and ladies and gentlemen, I say this. Mary Clayman said, we can't depend on who's the president. We must depend upon the people. And I go back to the original birth certificate, and it said in the Mayflower Compact, we're here for 3 reasons. The glory of God. Are we glorifying God today in our government? Absolutely not. When we're killing as many babies and performing all we're doing, absolutely not. But the second reason they said was for the advancement of the Christian faith. Christians are being put in jail, not overseas, but here in America. So we need to advance the Christian faith. So there's 3 reasons. Number 1, the glory of God, the advancement of the Christian faith, and the establishment of a righteous body politic. And I believe with Larry Clayman, it's going to take a 3rd Continental Congress to do it. Would you pray about it? And would you share with us anything you'd like to share? Mr. Davis, go ahead.
I'm going to throw something out. You want to talk about a little bit of logic that is interesting. The single most important reason for the Constitution is to protect we the people from the government. That's what the Constitution is all about. It was a limit on government power. Amen. So that we the people could not be abused and had our rights respected.
That's right.
It's amazing the number of people that want to argue that although we were, quote, endowed by our Creator, that it really didn't come from God, that it came from someplace else.
Yeah.
I'll argue that all day of the week. But isn't it interesting that the people that we are supposed to be protected from are the ones that get to define what the Constitution says? The example that I use for that is it's exactly the same as you asking Satan to tell you what the Bible means.
Yeah, and certainly it's going to be, at best, tainted. Now, I believe there is a scripture, not only the one in Luke 22:36 that Mr. Davis quotes often about being in prayer and prepared and armed, but I believe the answer to this is what Larry Clayman is seeking, and I know what I'm seeking, Mr. Davis and others, the hitchhiker that's here, and that is that very famous scripture, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, not the Congress, not the politicians, but if my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about some intricacies of a Third Continental Congress and a lot of other things, wordsmithing and so forth, but the most important thing is to bring about a healing to America. I don't think anybody would say, no, America's okay. I think everybody out there, no matter what party they're from or what they're concerned about, I think they would say, yes, America is in need of healing. Let us, the people, be called together to bring healing, and may God bless. Good day and good night, and God bless you.